And to make up time, and our next speaker is one of our own, Anthony Didlake. Dr. Didlake is currently an assistant professor at the Department of Meteorology of Penn State, and he also coming from the Bob House shop and working primarily and currently on hurricanes, and he's a specialist and expert on radars for hurricanes, especially now working on hurricane intensity forecast and Iowa replacement. And he's also, before joining Penn State, he's a postdoc fellow at NASA, and he's also part of the SOURCE program. By the way, I was a mentor at the SOURCE program myself when I was a postdoc at Council.
All right, thanks, Wu-Ching. So, yeah, it's an honor for me to talk to you all today, to honor Dr. Washington here. And after Wu-Ching's introduction, you can hear that I did pretty much everything that Deanna did in her life. I've been following her around. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of how Dr. Washington has played a role in impacting me through representation. And so first, who am I? So, yeah. So as Wu-Ching talked about, I study tropical cyclones, mostly through observations and in an effort to better understand what the structure of these storms are and how the structure and intensity change. And this is my primary research. It has nothing to do with climate models right now. But this is the work that I do, but it all started back in Detroit, where I'm originally from. And when I was in Detroit, I went to Detroit Public Schools, and I had different people around me, a lot of role models, but most of them were, actually there were a few STEM people, and those STEM people were engineers. So I knew that growing up, that's pretty much probably what I was going to do, because I was decent at math, I liked science, and so there was a good chance I was going to go to Michigan and become an engineer. That's what I was going to do. And my career in the atmospheric sciences actually started in undergrad at Yale, when my advisor there, Ron Smith, told me about the SOURCE program. So that's the Significant Opportunities in Atmospheric Research and Science. And this is actually their current website, and it's probably needs to be updated. So yeah, in the SOURCE program, of course, Dr. Washington and Carr had a pretty heavy hand in developing this, strategizing this program and putting it into process. And this is actually where, so I met a lot of, that's where I met Deanna for the first time. And it's also, I remember going to the SOURCE program during the summer to do the research, but as soon as we got there, the first thing that everyone told us was to make sure you schedule a meeting with Dr. Washington. That's an imperative. So, you know, I didn't know who Dr. Washington was when I was there, and they told me, oh, he's a big deal in the field, so, you know, make sure that you schedule that meeting, and so it pretty much was a rite of passage. So I didn't grasp the enormity of this type of meeting until I was actually there, and, you know, I was able to meet in person a Black atmospheric scientist, you know, Black like me. And that's when Dr. Washington had the very first huge impact on my career trajectory, as being like the first underrepresented minority atmospheric scientist that I had ever met. And so this is a clear demonstration of why representation matters in atmospheric sciences, in the geosciences, and of course larger in STEM. So we talk about underrepresented minorities often, and we know that that's just a demographic group that is, whose percentage of the population in that group is smaller than the percentage of the population of the country. But why is this label important? And I like to think of this underrepresented label being important in the context of why representation is important. And there are a couple of clear reasons for me, there are more, but clear reasons for me why this is important. And the first one is that first is that in the STEM field, through the research and education, we know that STEM is a critical underpinning for the overall functioning and well-being of and advancement of society as a whole. So this allows for effective implementation, and so, yeah, STEM is important. And because STEM is important, representation within the field of STEM is necessary for effective implementation of the benefits to the broader society. So this is something that Deanna talked about. When the field or a career doesn't reflect or represent the community that it serves, it becomes increasingly difficult for the benefits to be transferred. For example, we know that STEM is generally driven by specific problems or challenges, but we also know that not everyone's concerns and needs are the same. So, for example, other groups may have problems or challenges that aren't necessarily being reflected in the charges that the STEM research and education are actually doing. With sickle cell disease, we know that sickle cell disease is something that primarily affects African Americans. And this has been around for centuries. This disease has been around for centuries, but it hasn't been brought into the research fold until there was actually representation in the research field for this disease, where the knowledge of the disease became something that people started to want to look at research, do research to understand and cure this disease. So this is in the larger STEM fold, but of course representation is important even just beyond STEM. I didn't write this down until the last second, but with Puerto Rico and Hurricane Maria, we know that they are still, of course, struggling since the storm hit. And one of the reasons why it's been such a long road is because Puerto Rico doesn't have representation, voting representation in Congress. So having that representation at the level of decision makers, not just in STEM, but in everywhere, is very crucial for the entire society to benefit from being functioning correctly or being functioning well and also advancing in society. So the other aspect of why representation is important is that it's the representation. It improves and maintains the existence of representation in the future. So this is more the role model effect. And so what young people see around them positively or negatively shapes their expectations for themselves. And this, of course, applies outside of STEM. For example, as a young boy, when someone sees someone with his skin color who's an engineer, or when a young girl sees a scientist who's a woman, it plants a seed that this is possible. And that possibility, the idea of that possibility, of course, is a crucial beginning for the young person to be even remotely interested in that field. And so, as I said, this is very important, even just outside of STEM. And so, if you know me, there are two topics that I would light up and be excited to talk about. One of them is tropical cyclones. The other is tennis. So, if you guys indulge me for a second. So this role model effect is very apparent with black women in tennis, professional tennis. So Venus and Serena, of course, started in the late 90s, and they rose to fame through their great accomplishments at such an early age. And this was literally 20 years ago. So in that 20 years, there have been a slew of young black Americans, women that have become very accomplished in professional tennis, like Sloane Stephens, who won the US Open last year, Madison Keys, Tornado Black, Taylor Townsend, and Naomi Osaka. Yes, I know them all. And so this is a very clear example of why representation at the highest level, or at the most successful level, is important for the continuation of that representation. Thanks for indulging me. So this brings me back to my first meeting with Dr. Washington, because this representation in media, of course, has a much more larger impact if it's representation in person. So when I met with Dr. Washington, it was about a half hour, or the first time that I met with him, it was about a half hour meeting maybe, 30 small minutes that had a very impactful, it was very impactful on my career trajectory. I remember it being just him asking me about school, and we were talking about the path that I was going to choose, and it was very clear to me that he was really concerned with that, and he wanted to make sure that I was armed with the right ideas for how to pursue a career in meteorology. And he did this with every source student. So if you take those 30 minutes and multiply it by 20 plus students that summer, that's a significant amount of time that he took out of his schedule to make sure that we all had a role model, essentially. And this discussing the paths of, he definitely told me that I needed to go to graduate school, and he told me to apply to the University of Washington and Penn State. I went to Washington, but I'm here now. And of course, this would be, I think that's what I want to say. So this was a great time for me in terms of an inflection point, I would say, in my career. And I ended up, when I went to NCAR, I had a few realizations, and one of them was that the people actually, like these non-engineers, or most of them are not engineers, actually had, they studied science of the weather, which is something I always had an interest in. And they've got labs and they get paid to do this. And so it was actually possible to do what I wanted to do and not be an engineer. Second, I learned that the research that I did that summer and the writing that I did that summer was something I was actually decent in. And so those were two critical elements. And of course, the third critical element was that a black man can survive, and not just survive, but thrive in that work field and that work environment. So I had seen it. So Dr. Washington was that representation for me that was critical for me to know that I was able to pursue this field. So I would later chat with Dr. Washington pretty much at every meeting that I would see him in. And of course, I'd give him updates, and he'd give me some advice on what I can do in the field and how I can continue my career. And I would, of course, later meet other African Americans and underrepresented minorities in the field, all of whom, or many of whom, are in this room. That was not a Freudian slip. And of course, they all served as inspiration for me as my career continues. So I also understand this impact of representation is real with me being on the other side. So I know I am still early in my career, but I know that in my current position, I can also serve as a role model, and in turn, that like Dr. Washington did for me. And so I was going to talk about the importance of accurate representation of tropical cyclones and climate models, but I'll save that for another day. So this morning we've recounted numerous outstanding achievements of Dr. Washington and all of the well-deserved accolades that he's received in his career. And of course, all of his contributions to the field include decades of service, including all of his efforts to increase the number of people from underrepresented groups in the field. So today we salute you, Dr. Washington, and we thank you for all of your efforts, and I thank you for being that representation that paved the way for me. So thank you.